You're listening to the Spark Radio Network, Internet radio like you've never heard before. Innovation, creativity, and imagination are all said to begin with a spark. So fasten your seatbelt and take the ride of your life and listen for the spark.
You are listening to KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
Most writers and radio show hosts know that to connect with your fans, you need to do more than just write books or record the latest podcasts. There are many different elements that go into forming an online platform, but there are also many hidden traps. To make matters worse, solid advice on how to survive the muddy waters is scarce. In the book Hidden Traps, I talk about some of the important issues of working with an online platform, highlighting traps that could put your physical or internet security at risk or be harmful to your reputation. Are your social media posts just links with a few disjointed words, making you look like someone who can't complete a sentence? Did your new website cost you more than you anticipated? Are you leaking your personal contact details across the web without even knowing it? Then you need Hidden Traps. Hidden Traps is now available in paperback and ebook from a variety of retailers, including Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Kobo. Visit blackwolfpublications.com for more details.
If you're 85 or younger, would you like peace of mind and comfort for your family? We're Final Expense Direct with an urgent message for you. The average funeral today costs over $8,000, but the most you'll get from government benefits is $255. How will your family pay the difference? We can help. Our senior plans start as low as just $1 a day and pay up to $30,000 for a funeral and other final expenses. Peace of mind is easy. There's no medical exam. You'll have lifetime coverage, and your plan can't be canceled as long as you pay your premiums. Call now for free information about our senior plans. Answer a few simple questions and receive approval right on the phone. Plus, call right now and we'll give you a discount prescription card for free. Call 800-553-8687. That's 800-553-8687. Again, 800-553-8687.
KLRN Radio has advertising rates available. We have rates to fit almost any budget. Contact us at advertising@klrnradio.com.
Attention business owners and independent contractors. This is a money-saving message from Tax Mediation Services. If your business owes $20,000 or more in taxes, we can help you today, right now. Listen, dealing with the IRS is no picnic. It's an intimidating and extremely stressful process, and you don't want to go it alone. Our attorneys know every law, every tax break, and every possible opportunity to help you resolve and reduce your tax debt. And if you owe more than $20,000, you may be at the top of their hit list. So don't take your tax debt lightly, because it will not go away on its own. The IRS can seize your bank accounts, your home, and even shut down your business. Call our tax experts today at 1-800-783-0810 and let us deal with the IRS while you focus on your business. That's 1-800-783-0810. Again, that's 800-783-0810.
My son was in the Army back during Desert Storm, but even then he wanted an MBA. He looked at a dozen schools, but only one offered the online education and flexibility he needed while he was in a tent in Iraq. Grantham University. Turns out that Grantham's been delivering affordable, relevant college and advanced degrees for over 65 years. Heck, if they can deliver a quality education to a soldier in a tent overseas, think about the flexibility Grantham can offer you so you can earn your degree too. It doesn't matter how complicated or full your life is. If getting a degree is on your bucket list, you'll want to do what my son did. You'll want to call Grantham. Find out how easy it is to get started on your education so you can check that college degree off your bucket list. Call Grantham right now. 800-910-1370. That's 800-910-1370. Flexible, affordable, relevant. Call 800-910-1370.
Sometimes writers feel lost, unsure why a passage may not be working. It takes another set of eyes to help us nurture our writing into full maturity. At Black Wolf Editorial Services, we strive to enable writers to develop and grow, offering manuscript critiques and line edits through a mentoring editorial style. We also offer assistance on generating a writer's bio for your websites. Black Wolf Editorial Services, nurturing your writing into maturity. For a full list of services, visit blackwolfeditorial.com.
This is Don on the Air. It's a look at today's news and social commentary from an eyes-wide-open perspective. It's up to us to ensure the issues of today are decided by us, not for us, because no one will give us liberty. We must claim it for ourselves. It's a little bit funny how, well, for months now, I've been seeing all this talk about civil war. And it's come from across the entire spectrum, too. From far lefts and far rights to Antifa, white supremacists, Black Lives Matters. And the one thing that binds all these groups together is extremism. Yeah, they're all extremists. Now I'm going to let that simmer for just a moment and welcome you to Don on the Air. I am, in fact, Don Weston, and it is my pleasure to be here with you this evening. Now, I had to attend to some personal business last week, but, I hope you all enjoyed the best of Don on the Air, the Federalist Edition. It was a compilation of many of my comments related to our constitutional federalism. Now, if you missed it, you can stream it anytime at klrnradio.com/shows/DOTA. And if you can't write that down, I'm linked right off the show page at klrnradio.com. Now you can also reach me on Twitter at DonOnTheAir and by email at donontheair@klrnradio.com. So I was talking about how most of these factions calling for civil war are extremists. They're fringe. Now that's good news regarding how close we may or may not be to a literal civil war. Sure, they're the ones most likely to cause actual trouble, but being extremists means they're relatively few in size or influence. If they weren't, they wouldn't be the extreme, would they? No, they'd be the norm. But I'm not trying to dismiss these groups entirely. I mean, they definitely exist, and they certainly exert influence. After all, they feed off of human weakness to fill their ranks. Many of these people simply feel as though they just don't have a place in our society. And they cling to these different groups because they feel it's a place they can belong. Now, I understand this because I've been there. No, I'm not a joiner. I mean, I've never joined an official gang or a group or anything, but, I did hang with a group of misfits for several years. I watched one of the more sociopathic among us play these social experiments on the others. Loyalty games and the like. He'd like take something from someone and then leave clues that it was someone else and then study the results. Playing with other people's relationships to see if vague implications could spur mistrust among friends. And as it turns out, it can. Now, I mean, this isn't scientific, and while I really hated this guy, and I don't use that word hate very often, but, he opened my eyes to a whole new level of depravity. Manipulation for fun and profit. Now, I just wanted to live a life, but you can't really do that when you realize someone highly respected amongst your peers is manipulating those who trust him for his own personal satisfaction. Yeah, he kind of sounds like a politician, doesn't he? Are you starting to see why I'm such a strong advocate for our constitutional federalism? Without law and order, we'd have charismatic sociopaths running our, politicians. My bad. Well, anyway, I've associated with and mingled with folks from all walks of life and backgrounds. I see the similarities between these extremists, and the rest of us. And if you stop for a moment and really look around with eyes wide open, you'll see it too. You see, most people, we're divided up into our little groups for a variety of reasons. We call them cliques, we call them clubs, we call them gangs, we call them frats and sororities, We call them ideologies and political parties, and on it goes. And it's the same with these extremist groups. Now, in case you're wondering, I am attempting to humanize these groups to some degree because, there's a point of common ground here. That common ground is a sense of belonging. We become part of our various groups because we need to fit in somewhere. Now, some folks, they feel it more intensely than others, depending on a number of factors, including how excluded they feel from society. Now, let's ignore the leaders of these groups for just a moment, and the agendas of these groups, and just consider the rank and file membership. Now, sure, I'm going to be generalizing, and, if what I say doesn't apply to you, just ignore it. Now, if it offends you, there's probably a good reason for it. Now, I think that should probably become a part of my catchphrase collection here. I'm going to write that down in just a minute. Anyway, again, the rank and file of most of these groups out there, they just want to belong. And the more extreme the group, the further from society its members tend to believe they are. Black Lives Matters, they feed on racial disharmony. Folks are drawn to it because they feel separate from society. In this case, white society. And, let's face it, they do have good reason. Since the founding of our country, our society has focused more on light-skinned people. Although we have come such a long way toward equalizing the playing field that, in most regards, the only thing holding people back today is perspective. And that's the point, though. Perspective, it isn't tangible. It's just a point of view, an opinion. And when you're raised from birth to believe that you don't fit in, you don't belong, that becomes your point of view, your perspective. Similarly, the rank and file members of Antifa, they simply feel like they don't belong in our society. Their backgrounds are too numerous to try to classify, and they may have different personal goals, but the one thing a lot of these people have in common is that they just don't feel like they have any control or impact over their own lives. And that's why it's called an anti-Trump movement. For many of them, it's just an anti-government movement, an anti-society movement. Trump is just a convenient rallying point, a catalyst, if you will. Now, don't get all crazy about this, but it's similar to ISIS. Because the leadership of ISIS supposedly wanted to create a religious caliphate. Yet many of those in ISIS or who defect to ISIS or whatever aren't religiously motivated. They just want to, lash out, or they just want to watch the world burn, or they just want to belong somewhere, anywhere. Now, most of these groups' leaders, they have very specific goals which ultimately result in either segregating themselves from or subjugating others. They prey on this human weakness, this feeding on faulty perspectives. Now, please understand, again, I'm not creating excuses for any of these people. As I said, I'm trying to humanize the rank and file. They are ruled by perspective, and perspective can change. Many of these people are not lost causes. They've just been programmed. Because it's a common thread between these groups, the feeling rejected by our nation. So what's the solution? Well, the solution is the easy part. We already have the solution. It's called our constitutional federalism. No, seriously, our Constitution provides the tools necessary for nearly anyone to have a voice or to make an impact without the use of violence. Our federalist structure ensures we have the mostly autonomous lands with which to shape our ideal societies. That's why I say our constitutional federalism allows for the most individual liberty while still maintaining a societal structure of any government system out there. The hard part comes when we consider that these people have essentially been programmed to believe the Constitution works against them, isn't applicable to them, or is beyond their reach. So if we want to retain our representative republic and maintain our constitutional federalism, we have to break through that programming and reveal the truth. And that truth is, the Constitution works for us all. It is for the people, by the people, and guess what? We're all considered the people. You know, this opening monologue, I mean, it spawned from all this Civil War nonsense and the idea that Antifa supposedly planned some sort of campaign for national civil unrest scheduled to begin the weekend of November 4th. Now, Snopes debunked the validity of those claims, in its typically biased fashion, downplaying the overall dangerous nature of Antifa events. Now, you should investigate this for yourself, but the gist is that one guy pretending to be a federal agent produced a YouTube video that, the folks at InfoWars latched onto, and supposedly this is how a rumor started that Antifa was going to start a civil war on November 4th, 2017. Now, let's be real here. It could just as easily have been a false start instigated by some outside influence. Snopes' own proof, of a hoax ends up proving Antifa was planning something massive. Snopes cited a call to action from revcom.us that specifically states, "On November 4th, 2017, we will gather in the streets and public squares of cities and towns across this country. At first, many thousands declaring that this whole regime is illegitimate and that we will not stop until our single demand is met. This nightmare must end. The Trump-Pence regime must go. Our protest must grow day after day and night after night, thousands becoming hundreds of thousands, and then millions, determined to act to put a stop to the grave danger that the Trump-Pence regime poses to the world by demanding that this whole regime be removed from power." So, you see, there were plans for Antifa to take to the streets across the country in protest. Now, of course, Snopes points out that the call to action did not threaten violence. But here's the thing. Antifa's only publicized protests have, in fact, become riots. Therefore, when Antifa announces a protest, it's reasonable to assume there may be a little violence there. Now, Antifa has come right out, in no uncertain terms, claiming they're working to overthrow our government. Even the manifesto, Antifa, the Anti-Fascist Handbook, by Mark Bray, details the use of violence against those with differing political viewpoints. So yeah, now we're supposed to believe Antifa is just a group of non-violent hipster protesters? Ignorance may be bliss to the ignorant, but to the rest of us, it can be downright dangerous. So why the change of heart from Antifa? Well, let's consider the timeline here. The calls to action started going out, as best as I could tell, in early August. Now, by early September, Antifa was officially considered a domestic terrorist organization by U.S. security officials. Now, this was a blessing and a curse. It lent Antifa street cred for being notorious enough to gain negative attention from the government. But the problem is, as a domestic terrorist group, there could be swifter and more direct responses from law enforcement. After all, when domestic terrorists take to the streets, the government must respond. So having been labeled domestic terrorist by the government and major nationwide protests, which often spark into riots, looming, what was poor Antifa to do? Well, as I've learned, an immense amount of detail, planning, time, energy, and money go into starting grassroots campaigns. The more grassroots the movement is, the more resource-intensive it becomes. So it stands to reason that, the Antifa organizers would not want their platform suddenly yanked out from under them or to see all that hard work go to waste. So yes, of course, a significant downplaying of their activities and an image makeover was in order. Now, from my perspective, that's what we're experiencing right now, an image makeover. It's just like, when the violent anti-police rhetoric of Black Lives Matter resulted in the murders of 5 police officers in Dallas, Texas back in 2016. The pressure became too high and Black Lives Matter suddenly became very subdued and far more controlled and strategic. And this is what I see happening with Antifa, after having been designated domestic terrorists. I mean, personally, I wouldn't be surprised if Antifa is being directly counseled by Black Lives Matters, you know? I mean, the two groups have seemingly begun to work together, and they have similar goals. You know, weakening the strength of our nation. Black Lives Matters, you know, they do it by attacking our law enforcement agencies, and Antifa attacks our foundation of government. I mean, they're not the same group, but they serve the same interests, especially if you pay attention to the Democratic Socialists of America. Now, it doesn't have to be a conspiracy to be true. I mean, sometimes there's simply a catalyst, all right, that's used to spark multiple eruptions, and then one group ultimately harnesses all of that combustible energy and focuses it, you know, in an outward blast that just rocks the very foundation of our nation, weakening it, so that when people cry out for relief and protection, the government will be there to save them. Now, just hold on a doggone minute, Don. Didn't you just say that these groups were anti-government? Why, yes, I did. But it's not as if they want no government at all. They just don't want our current form of government. They want to uproot our constitutional federalist foundation and replace it with one more to their liking. If they only knew our constitutional federalism allows them the power to shape a state government as they see fit, I mean, all they really need is a majority to elect them into office, and then to support and defend the Constitution, because it's the Constitution that would support their right to govern a state, you know, as they see fit, within the boundaries set by the Constitution, of course. Now, yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like I'm giving the enemy the key to the city or something, but in reality, I mean, if you're a citizen of this nation, then we're all in this together. What was that Benjamin Franklin quote? Yes, we must hang together, or most assuredly, we shall all hang separately. Franklin was saying that, you know, we must be unified, or else all is lost. And sure, he was speaking specifically of the Revolutionary War at the time, but this quote certainly applies today as we work to maintain our independence. Make no mistake, I mean, that's what we're up against here. You know, that's what we're all up against, even those who end up fighting for what they claim they're fighting against. And this Civil War nonsense, I mean, it's beyond absurd. You know, I have a feeling that the people who are most vocal about ushering in a civil war, you know, they're the same people who'd be curled up under a bed or hiding in a closet when the rain began to fall. They'll be easy to find if you just follow the urine trail. Most of these people, I mean, they've never seen any real action, you know? That didn't take place behind a handheld controller. Now, I haven't seen any real action, but I have seen someone shot in the head. It's horrifying. Most of these people can't even handle watching Glenn get beat with a baseball bat on The Walking Dead. How are they supposed to handle any real action? Are you kidding me? Well, if it happens, people will mature real fast, but by then, it'll be too late. So don't get me wrong, you know, people like this are dangerous. I have no doubt that many of them have no clue what kind of hell they're bringing on themselves, their loved ones, their friends, and their future. All of our futures, in fact. And folks wonder why the government want to whittle down our Second Amendment rights. I mean, of course they claim it's to protect us. I mean, we know that's utter nonsense because criminals do not follow laws. There's absolutely no reason to believe criminals will lay their guns down simply because the government tells them to. That's why they're called criminals. No, it's common knowledge that a disarmed populace is far easier to control. I mean, you have to figure, our government wants control. That's clear regarding how summarily they dismiss the limits set in the Constitution. We know the most peaceful transition into communism, total government control, is through socialism. And they need a peaceful transition because it's clear there will be heavy resistance should the government suddenly roll tanks down the street and start loading us up into buses to haul us off to camps or wherever. All of this unrest clearly works in the government's favor. If Antifa, Black Lives Matter, or some other extremist group initiates a shooting war or some other massive catastrophe, then the government has recourse to suspend the Constitution and take essentially whatever action it deems necessary to gain what? That's right, control. Now, if that's too extreme for you, let's dial it back a couple of notches to where, if there's an open shooting war, you can be rest assured the government would suspend, remove, or flat out ignore the Second Amendment. That would be enough to leave us defenseless to where the government could then remove or alter the First Amendment, maybe our Fourth, Fifth, and Eighth Amendments. Since it seems a majority of states right now have little to no interest in demanding lawfulness from our federal government, what makes you think they'll stand up for any of our citizens if the federal government begins suspending constitutional rights in response to an open shooting war? I mean, chances are law enforcement would be overwhelmed and they'd need the help. If people are killing each other in the streets, what you gonna do? You think it can't happen here? I know you do. Well, some of you anyway. But let me tell you, that belief is precisely why it can happen here. Complacency, it leads to apathy, which leads to enslavement. The time to act is now. It's time we rein in our governments and hold them accountable to the Constitution. Meanwhile, we must deprogram our populace and remind our citizenry, our families, our friends, our associates. It's time to remind the nation how the Constitution works for them. Without a baseline for law, that we must all follow, all bets are off. And it's true. I do have skin in this game, but then again, don't we all? We have friends, we have families, we have our own lives to think about. But one thing is for sure, I don't need your civil war. But I ranted a little long, and I do need a break, so I'll do that and see you here when Don on the Air returns in just a moment.
Most writers and radio show hosts know that to connect with your fans, you need to do more than just write books or record the latest podcasts. There are many different elements that go into forming an online platform, but there are also many hidden traps. To make matters worse, solid advice on how to survive the muddy waters is scarce. In the book Hidden Traps, I talk about some of the important issues of working with an online platform, highlighting traps that could put your physical or internet security at risk or be harmful to your reputation. Are your social media posts just links with a few disjointed words, making you look like someone who can't complete a sentence? Did your new website cost you more than you anticipated? Are you leaking your personal contact details across the web without even knowing it? Then you need Hidden Traps. Hidden Traps is now available in paperback and ebook from a variety of retailers, including Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and Kobo. Visit blackwolfpublications.com for more details.
This is Don on the Air.
Have you ever thought about your soul? Can it be saved? Or perhaps you think that when you are dead, you just stay in your grave. Is God just a thought within your head, or is it part of you? Is Christ just a name that you read in the book when you were in school?
Oh, yeah. I got right on it out of the gate this evening, didn't I? But, I may have forgotten to mention that nothing really happened on November 4th, at least as far as I know. I believe that's why Antifa organizers were just trying to blow it all off. It's almost as if they're all lined up in a row, and every once in a while someone just flinches, and trying to get the others to take off running. But they're all just so scared that no one will take that leap. And that's a good thing. And their hesitance is saving lives. So keep it up. And welcome back to Don on the Air. Now, you probably noticed by now that the theme of America's woes doesn't change much. Just the scenery. Same stuff, different day. Sometimes it's the silly or truly idiotic, and other times it's the senselessness of horrific tragedy. Of course, on November 5th, we had another church shooting. This one really ticked me off because Well, once again, this type of tragedy was perpetrated by someone with severe mental problems who simply slipped through the cracks of our mental health industry. And some folks are out there trying to say, you can't focus on his mental health issues because that alone was not a determining factor. And that's true, to an extent. Others still use the occasion to attack our Constitution and blame the guns. Same stuff, different day. But when you consider this murderer was court-martialed in the Air Force, for beating his family, and then he escaped from a mental health facility while awaiting that court-martial. I mean, he was caught beforehand sneaking firearms onto base and even made death threats against his own chain of command. Yeah, really. So how could all of this have possibly gone unnoticed? Well, according to CNN, the Air Force acknowledged Monday it did not appropriately relay Kelly's court-martial conviction for domestic assault to civilian law enforcement, preventing it from appearing in 3 databases, including the FBI's National Instant Criminal Background Check System. Had his information been in the database, it should have prevented gun sales to Kelly, the Air Force said in a statement. You're kidding me, right? A clerk failed at their job and possibly helped murder 26 people? Where's the accountability? Oh, I know. I mean, a lot of people are demanding the victim's survivors be allowed to sue the Air Force, who's normally protected by sovereign immunity laws. But let's think about that for a second. Where exactly does the Air Force get its money? Yeah, from the government. And where does the government get its money? That's right, from you and I. So if they're suing the Air Force, aren't we the ones paying for it? Now, personally, had I been the clerk, I'd have done my damn job. But I'm not the clerk, and I don't deserve to be sued over it, and neither do you. I'd almost prefer to see the clerk and whoever is responsible for checking their work be brought up on charges. Maybe something that encompasses neglect resulting in wrongful death. I mean, that almost sounds like a harsh knee-jerk reaction, but there's got to be accountability somewhere, right? It wasn't the fault of the guns themselves, the gun control laws, or even the law-abiding citizens who depend on their personal firearms for safety. Other than a total ban, there wasn't a gun control law that could have prevented this shooting. It was clearly an issue of negligence on the part of the Air Force and our mental health system. The guy escaped from a mental, what was it? Peak Behavioral Health Systems in New Mexico. Okay, look, aren't they partially to blame as well? If someone escapes from a mental health facility, shouldn't that get them on the prohibited possessor list? Shouldn't the facility have reported that to the FBI or something? Let's be real. If a guy goes to a shrink and talks about having homicidal thoughts, the therapist is supposed to report that guy to the police. Yet someone who's at a mental health facility, awaiting court-martial for beating his family, nearly killing his stepson, escapes the facility and no one reports him to the FBI? Unbelievable. This is the part of the government where we could actually use some redundancy. I'd rather have the same person reported 5 times from 5 different sources for the same issue than to have no one do it at all. Now, I know some folks fear the idea of using mental health criteria to revoke someone's unalienable rights. Well, guess what? I do too. What's to stop the government from going from limiting, schizophrenic and manic depression to limiting OCD and ADD? People regularly call liberalism and conservatism mental disorders. So yeah, think about that for a moment. But when I talk about our mental health system, I'm also talking about reporting obvious concerns to the proper authorities, like when a guy escapes your facility while awaiting court-martial for vicious domestic violence charges. And yeah, my thoughts and prayers do go out to the victims, their families, and everyone impacted by this horrific attack. I won't be bullied into silencing my faith. These people, they're learning. The anti-Christian movement out there. Usually they say, prayer doesn't help, and then time and again they're met with personal testaments that indicate the contrary. This time around, I'm hearing a lot of, prayers don't prevent massacres. And on this point, they're right. You see, the thing is, prayer is not a mechanism for preventing bad things from happening. That was never the point. Prayer is simply communication with God. It's an affirmation of faith, an empowering of the soul, an expression of love and reverence. When I pray, I do sometimes ask for things. And if it comes to pass, I thank God for his mercy. If not, I ask God for the strength to persevere. I don't have expectations. I don't make demands. I don't blame, and I don't beg. I just talk with God. And there's power in prayer because there's power in belief. I believe in God and his impact in my life, so when I speak to him, it's empowering for me. Now, that empowerment can take the form of comfort, confidence, encouragement, motivation. It just depends on what my needs are at the time. And sure, you might say that I'm just latching on to some focus that I use to distract myself from my problems, or that God serves as some sort of placebo where I've convinced myself that I feel something. I understand those perspectives because I was equally dismissive for much of my life. No, I'm not saying all of this because I expect to change anyone's mind. I'm saying it because I believe it. And if someone's missing a piece to their puzzle and just happens to discover it here, well, then it's worth discussing. We're talking about faith and belief, and no one could convince me either was real. I fell for a really long time before finally hitting bottom, before finally being stripped of my pride and my arrogance, and was humbled enough to accept that the world simply didn't revolve around me. Now, while no one could convince me, there were people out there who planted seeds along the way. And once I realized how lost I truly was, those seeds, they took root, and I began to look at the world in a new way. What was once shadowy darkness began to brighten, and I could see the hope and the love in things that I never could before. It wasn't as if someone flipped a light switch or anything. Rather, it was the beginning of a journey. And these revelations, they come over time and are often earned the hard way. Instead of looking at myself as a useless victim of circumstance, helpless in a brutal world without hope, instead of focusing on every negative influence that fed on my soul and my confidence for years, instead of simply giving in to the world, I decided to rise above it. It's not something you could just pay lip service to either. You can't just claim the label of Christian and expect to make an impact in your life. I think a lot of people give faith a passing glance or may even commit, but only on the surface. They never really open up internally, which is where it really counts. Yeah, I just called Christianity a label, didn't I? Well, of course it is. It's a term that we use to describe those who follow the Christ. But I have an aversion to labels. Arbitrary labels anyway, the ones that can have the definitions changed out from under you. I just grew tired of it. That's why I prefer to claim my independence rather than limit myself to a tribalized style of political thinking. I used to feel that way about the term Christian. I was embarrassed by all the hypocrites out there. I'd survived a difficult journey through my own private hell and back, before I could accept Christ, and I felt as though I'd actually earned the title. Then it turns out that any jerk who'd just give you the finger as he cuts you off pulling out of the church parking lot could call himself a Christian? Well, what's the point in that? Well, of course, now I see how hypocritical I was. Look, I'm far from perfect, okay? I'm just a sinner, just like everyone else. And the thing is, while being a Christian means striving for a Christ-like life, none among us will ever be perfect. We're simply not meant to be perfect. God uses imperfect people to pass along faith. Our imperfection highlights the perfection that is God. It's His story of unconditional love that guides us. That's why He's God. His perfection is the example we, in our imperfection, strive for. That's why I refer to a Christian life as a journey. These days when I feel the need to criticize the extent of someone else's faith, I have to remember that we're all on the same journey. We're just at different places along the way. For everything I think I know, there's an unfathomable amount that I really have no clue even exists. So I may feel as though I'm far along my journey, but in the grand scheme of things, maybe I'm just getting started. That's why I try not to ever question someone else's faith. Now, I'll criticize me some actions. Oh, believe I'll judge the crap out of you for doing something I think is stupid, but I can't question the sincerity of your faith. I lack both the insight and the authority. I could no more judge the weight on someone else's soul than I could track my own ledger, and I have intimate knowledge of myself. As mortals, it's simply not our job. And one of the more disturbing aspects of the 2016 election cycle was the use of the acronym CINO, C-I-N-O, Christian in name only. Now, sure, it was used to describe Donald Trump, and, that drove me crazy because, to me, judging someone else's faith, it sets an artificial bar that everyone must adhere to in order to qualify. Christianity is not elitist. Remember, Jesus himself preferred the company of the more sinful among us because, to him, they were the ones who needed him the most. And yeah, I was quick to point out how Trump, who is an open adulterer, stated he's never asked forgiveness because he's never done anything to need forgiveness for. And considering that forgiveness is a core element of our faith, that was difficult for me to hear. But in fairness, I also had to mention it wasn't my place to judge whether Trump was, in fact, a Christian. I was only saying that I have a tough time trusting a Christian who doesn't think they've ever done anything to need forgiveness for. Now, a few months back, some friends of mine were being harassed because they support the NRA. People were questioning the sincerity of their faith because they support an organization which promotes a product that exists to end life. Hey, relax. I own mine for self-defense too. But I wouldn't draw it unless I intended to use it, and I wouldn't intend to use it unless it was a matter of life or death. Firearms, they aren't toys or props. They're tools that were invented as a means of propelling a projectile into living flesh from a distance. Yes, firearms do exist to end life. So my friends had their faith called into question because they supported a tool, that exists to end life, despite Christianity professing the preservation of life. Now, there are many, many points that could be argued here, but for now I'm mostly interested in the fact it's not up to us to judge the sincerity of anyone's faith. We are all imperfect beings at different places along the same journey. All we can really do is choose to offer to help those struggling more than we are. We can live our lives with confidence in our faith and love and lead by example. Years ago, back when I was living paycheck to paycheck, I had to decide between breakfast or lunch because I couldn't afford both. And that day I decided on breakfast so I could at least start my day well. And it just so happened that this was the day some random person decided to pay for the order for the guy behind him. Now, I was the recipient of that generosity. And it was a simple gesture that was uplifting, and it truly impacted my life, even till this day, because here I am talking about it. And that was just a small thing. Now consider a service member struggling with PTSD, trapped in this mindset of being forgotten and alone. Maybe today is the day that they decided that maybe he just ended all. Well, then he's stopped outside of a store by a child who shakes his hand and thanks him for his service. Maybe then that service member realizes, maybe he's not alone. Maybe he's not forgotten. And maybe the world isn't as dark as he thought. You see, we don't know. That's why we call it faith. I've been meaning to discuss faith for a while now, and to be honest, this wasn't even the tip of an iceberg. Now, I've mentioned before how I felt a calling in the late 90s, and I've had people recommend to me that maybe I should become a pastor, over the years, and I was never really interested because, if you hadn't noticed, I'm just a little bit opinionated. And, I also know that I see Christianity a little differently than other people. And I was always afraid of the backlash, if I just happened to touch the wrong nerve. Now, these aren't all the excuses I've come up with over the years, but these are two of the most common. Now, the funny thing is, if this really is a true calling, then the Lord, he'd sort it all out, right? By his design, not mine, of course. He might see the need for more hardship in my future. And better still, my ignoring it wouldn't make that less true. It just mean that I'm a little slow on the uptake, I'd probably still end up doing whatever the Lord expected of me, and I'd have just wasted a bunch of time in the process by procrastinating. So maybe we'll consider this just a small step. The Lord's been patient with me this far. If nothing else, faith is a part of my life, and it's a part of our society, and I talk about both on occasion. So, there you go. Now, I do have a minute or so longer, and as an aside, along with my love of faith, you may be interested to know that I have a healthy respect for science. I believe science is man's way of explaining the wonder of God's creation. Why couldn't the Big Bang Theory explain God's design? It is possible, isn't it? Genesis describes creation as happening over a period of days. Well, I'm not sure anyone still believes those days are by man's reckoning, as in a 24-hour cycle. I always took it to mean like a unit of measurement that was described as a day because, well, that's how Moses could comprehend it. Who's to say it didn't take 100 million years or a split second? A snap of the fingers. Bang! Creation. And evolution. Why not? It makes sense, right? So God created man in his image. That's the only description we get. Science claims the hominid lineage appeared some 6 million years ago. Now let's say, for simplicity's sake, that it's true. Because let's face it, who really knows? But now, if it is true, who's to say that one day, in the beginning of Genesis, wasn't 1 million years? After all, if man was created on the sixth day, and the hominids appeared 6 million years ago. You see, that's why I say science, it's just a way for mankind to wrap its feeble mind around the wonder that is God's creation. Anyway, I guess we'll talk about this again sometime soon, but I'm going to step out for just a moment, and then we'll get on to a few of your comments, and when Don on the Air returns in just a moment.
You're listening to the Spark Radio Network, internet radio like you've never heard before. Innovation, creativity, and imagination are all said to begin with a spark. So fasten your seatbelt and take the ride of your life and listen for the spark.
You are listening to KLRN Radio, where liberty and reason still reign.
This is Don on the Air. Man, this is one of my favorite songs. It fires me right up. Now, I don't know if you've seen the television commercials for Google Home Mini. Oh, God. I'm going to have to discuss the all-powerful Google one day. Quickly becoming its own religion, kind of like Apple. But anyway, the Google Home Mini commercial mentions needing a song to wake up to. And in the commercial, it's that annoying Circle of Life song from The Lion King. Hey, look, it's cool that someone likes it. Someone has to, right? But the space truckin', now that would be on my wake-up playlist. I actually jam out to it as part of my show prep every week. And now you know. So welcome back to Don on the Air. And, yeah, it's been a month or more, and, well, look, don't get the wrong idea here. I mean, it's not like I get hundreds of emails or anything, but I do get them on occasion, and I get DMs and tweeted comments on Twitter, and I do like to take a moment to respond to those when I get a chance. And tonight is one of those times, so here we go. Now, as a part of my Halloween episode, I spoke a bit about abortion. I was set off earlier in that week by a thoughtless bumper sticker that really got me thinking about the rhetoric we sometimes use in our opposition and in the way we handle the women who ultimately choose abortion. Now, specifically, I said, I think it was, on one hand, you have people offering choices, and on the other hand, you have people screaming, "Baby killer!" Now, first, yeah, I have heard plenty of people screaming "baby killer" in my lifetime. And I have, in fact, seen bumper stickers proclaiming, if you have an abortion, you are a baby killer. And while I respect the people who took issue with these comments, I find it incredibly difficult to believe that they've never heard of this happening before, outside of the kooks at Westboro Baptist Church. But, I mean, it's possible, so I decided to, let's just look at this with eyes wide open. Now, it's true. A fetus is a person, and ending the life of a person is murder. Therefore, abortion is murder. It's also true if a fetus is a person and abortion is murder, then aborting a fetus is killing a baby. So when we plaster across the skies that abortion is murder, we are, in a very real sense, rubbing these women's noses in it. But now the problem was that I was trying to offer the perspective of what a frightened, confused young woman might see, and I presented it in a binary manner. Now, I presented it like this on purpose because this is often how people see these types of choices, as binary. I also feel that the way we approach these women can help determine which choice they ultimately make. But, at the end, I acknowledge the perceived reality of how the pro-life movement is painted in the media, but I fail to acknowledge the reality, which is that many, if not most pro-lifers, do approach these women the proper way, thoughtfully, lovingly, and with respect. When the extremists are the ones promoted and discussed in the media, well, all you really see is the negativity, so it's easy to overlook the good work people actually do out there. And this is part of the problem in the way that I see it, is whether we like it or not, the loudest among us, they're the ones who set the precedents to outsiders or newcomers. I mean, this is why, I surrendered the conservative label. Too many people with big voices twist its meaning. That's why I so fiercely defend the term federalist or our constitutional federalism. Now, I understand some folks took offense at my presentation because they didn't like being painted in such a negative light. Now, if I'm right, though, and that's how the pro-life movement is perceived, then that is the real problem, isn't it? That these misconceptions exist, not that I pointed them out. I believe we need to find a way to make sure that first impression from the pro-life movement is a message of thoughtfulness, love, and respect. And that's difficult to do when the dominant media uses its influence to push a specific agenda, but we have to keep at it. And I don't personally have a solution, but maybe I can help. Perhaps in the coming weeks, I'll see if I can have someone on who can speak for the pro-life movement, and maybe we can discuss these issues. I can't control what the rest of the media does, but, I can control what happens here on this show. So yeah, we should do that. Yeah. Make a note. Moving along, I've had a few people asking me about Kevin Spacey. Because I did a show on sexual assault a few weeks ago and all. And, I'm glad he's facing some music. I mean, I thought it was in poor taste how he admitted to what he did by blowing it off as something he may have done while he was drunk and then attempted to hide behind the gay community. I won't read his statement here because it's kind of long and it's kind of nonsensical, and I don't have it in front of me, but you can find it easily enough. Anyway, I thought it was awesome how gay celebrities weren't having any of this. You know, like Wanda Sykes. I mean, she said something like, "You don't get to choose to hide under the rainbow." You know, Zachary Quinto, Rosie O'Donnell. I never thought I'd be in agreement with Rosie O'Donnell. And the problem is, you know, Spacey, he can't be criminally prosecuted because of the statute of limitations. I mean, let's face it. You know, being disgraced now, well, I mean, I guess it just depends on how he takes it, really. I mean, he can still live a wealthy and comfortable life off the career he's had. Being suddenly exiled from Hollywood, you know, it might sting his ego a little bit, but it's hardly a suitable punishment for taking advantage of a teenage boy. Now, again, Spacey didn't deny it. He offered a, "well, I must have been drunk," you know, kind of apology. You know, this is an example, along with Corey Feldman, as to why the statute of limitations keeps getting in the way. Now, if you didn't know, Corey Feldman was claiming, you know, he couldn't go to the police with his accusations, and he needed to out these pedophiles. He needed to out them in his own way. Well, people kept pushing him, and finally he did go to the police, and, you know, what did the police do? Well, they ultimately had to tell him that with the statute of limitations, there was nothing they could do. So now Corey Feldman put himself out there, essentially for nothing, because the laws in California don't adequately protect children or punish those who would abuse them. Now here in Georgia, you know, the rape of an adult has a statute of limitations of 15 years. Now up until recently, the statute of limitations for child rape could have been as little as 2 years. Thankfully, Georgia law has changed now, and anyone molested after July 1st, 2012 enjoys no statute of limitations. It does nothing for the victims prior to that date, but, I mean, at least our children are better protected moving forward. But there really needs to be no statute of limitations on sexual assault involving children. Period. And I'm talking about cases that could go to trial. You know, prosecutors generally don't take cases to trial that can't meet a burden of proof. So it's not as if I'd be asking for a 30-year later lynch mobs, you know, over just accusations. I mean, I'm saying child molestation is a life sentence. And the criminals who do it shouldn't just have to beat the clock to escape justice. No, we need no statute of limitations on child sexual assault in all 50 states. I mean, man, I say, you know, if there was ever a worthy cause, it's protecting our children. I mean, let's figure out a way to make that happen, huh? Anyway, I guess that's about all of my time for this evening. You know, I had a few more things I wanted to get into, but we'll shelf those until another time. You know, I would like to thank everyone deeply for your support. I mean, even if I occasionally set you off, I mean, that's a good thing, isn't it? You know, when I get fired up, I mean, it helps remind me what I'm really passionate about. It might also give us time to pause and consider, you know, if we're being truly effective or to think of ways to improve our approach. You know, most of us have similar goals, and we'll find that when we work together is when we make the greatest impact. Anyway, don't forget, you know, love me or hate me, you can always reach me at Don on the Air on Twitter and by email, donontheair@klrnradio.com. Your feedback, it helps me too, you know. But I'll see you here next week, Monday at 10 p.m. Eastern, right here on KLRNRadio.com. And if you miss an episode, you can always stream me anytime from my show page at KLRNRadio.com. We're also available on iTunes, iHeartRadio, and a few of the other usual places like Spreaker.com. But until next time, you know, just remember, there's a time for tough love, and there's a time for just love. You know, it's sometimes tricky to know which is the right approach for the right situation. But I think so long as there is genuine love involved, we're on the right path. A world without love is, well, described in Revelations. And if it's inevitable, well, I mean, there's no reason to rush it. Is there?